Let's raise the big questions on that big story. Is democracy once again on the brink, in danger in Nepal? Are the protests organic or are they orchestrated? Is this revolution or is this anarchy? Army rule, interim government, or elections now? Nepal staring at prolonged uncertainty, and how will that affect India? Joining me now, three very special guests, joined by Rakesh Sood, former Indian ambassador to Nepal, someone who knows that country very well. Joined by Amitabh Bhattu, Dean and Professor, School of International Studies at JNU. Yuvraj Ghimire, journalist and writer who's been based in Kathmandu for years, but is at the moment in the national capital. I appreciate all three of you joining us. I want to come to you, Yuvraj, first. Okay, we'll come to Yuvraj in a moment, but let me go to Rakesh Sood for your first remarks. Rakesh Sood, how are you seeing this situation unfolding in Nepal? We could see the 10th government there in 11 years. Is this surprising, or is chronic instability now built into Nepal?
Thank you, Rajdeep. And I can say that having spent 3 years of my career in Nepal, I feel very sad when I see this. But the fact is that since 2008, since 2008, when monarchy was abolished, and we had the first Constituent Assembly creating a new constitution for Nepal, since then we've had 15 prime ministers. So that's 17 years, 15 prime ministers. If we look at the constitution, which was adopted in 2015, 10 years ago, since 2015, we've had 9 governments, which means in the last 10 years, we've only had 9 governments. And the prime ministers has been a game of musical chairs. It's been the same people. It's been the Maoist leader Prachand. It's been Krishna Prasad Sharma Oli, the UML leader who is now resigned and has been asked to continue as caretaker, and it's been Sher Bahadur Deoba. And I think what we are seeing is not just a rejection of Oli and Oli's government. What we are seeing is a rejection of that particular class of political leadership which have prevented, including in their own political parties, youngsters to come up. Which is why people are looking towards Balen Shah, who's a young mayor of Kathmandu. Balen Shah is a former rapper in his 30s, goes around 24/7 with dark glasses, black trousers. But Balen Shah also, by the way, kept his peace. And it is only now, when the violence is getting out of control, that Balen Shah is trying to claim leadership of this movement. There was somebody else, by the way, I just saw Rabi Lamichhane, who was a former TV personality. And Rabi Lamichhane joined the government as deputy prime minister, got caught in a corruption scandal, was in jail. And just a couple of hours ago, his supporters went to the jail, got him released, because the jail authorities said we can't ensure peace and security in the jail. So he's now gone home. Now, so there is a populism that has taken hold. And I think you know as well as I do that when populism takes hold and there is no leadership, there is no control, we don't know how this is going to unfold.
Let me for a moment bring in also Amitabh Bhattu, who's just written a column on what's happening there. Amitabh Bhattu, you've drawn a parallel possibly between what we saw in Bangladesh a year ago and what we are now seeing in Nepal. Youth protesters hitting the streets, challenging what they see is an aging, decrepit, corrupt leadership, and demanding answers to key issues like joblessness and misgovernance. Is that how you see Nepal at the moment? That this is a unique protest even compared to previous unrest. This is a protest primarily driven by the youth against corruption and misgovernance and joblessness?
Rajdeep, the first parallel between Bangladesh and Nepal is that sadly, despite all the expertise in the Ministry of External Affairs, we had no anticipation that these events were going to unfold. Bangladesh happened behind our back. No one that I know of spoke about what was going to be the biggest uprising in Nepal since living memory, really. Never have you seen young people on the streets of Nepal violently protesting against the ruling regime, catalyzed by a ban, a short sighted ban on social media applications, and every district of Nepal is today impacted. The second parallel is, of course, the easy way to build a conspiracy theory that there are other elements, as you pointed out, who might be fishing in these troubled waters. That may or may not be the point. It may be the case in this case. The important thing is, why did this happen? First of all, you recognize that Nepal's biggest source of its GDP is remittances from abroad. Nearly a quarter of Nepal's GDP is based on people who have left Nepal sending money abroad. So, what's happening is there's an exodus of young people, and those who have stayed back are on the streets. It's a completely dysfunctional economy, a dysfunctional polity. Young people who could be the demographic dividend are suddenly become the demographic nightmare because they see a system which has betrayed them, a political regime which inspires no confidence. And if there is a parallel, is that, and I hope that's not a parallel, is that India has to be extremely cautious about how it approaches Nepal. Remember, the street protests in Bangladesh quickly turned into an anti India vehicle. In Nepal, our ties are much more proximate in every sense of the word: civilizational, cultural, open borders, shared rivers. It's important that we engage without being patronizing, that we engage all actors, especially the young people of Nepal, and that we do so in a manner in which we respect the sensitivities of the people of Nepal. I think it's important for Nepal to understand that
Can
India is a benign neighbor which will only help to try and stabilize Nepal. I think finally, Rajdeep, I think the most important point is that despite the chaos and anarchy, the Nepalese army, which used to be the Royal Nepalese Army or the Gorkhali Army, is today still unified as a force. And you have had the chief of the army staff come out clearly against the violence and the anarchy on the streets. I have great faith in the Nepali army. I think it is a force which can still manage to inject a modicum of stability even while things seem lost on the ground.
I just want to throw a number which I think viewers need to understand. More than 4 lakh departures annually, more than 400,000 departures, meaning more than 400,000 Nepalese are migrating out of their country, many of them to India, an average of more than 1,000 a day. Therefore, the very demographic of Nepal is being hollowed out in a way, and that is seen to be part of the crisis that has taken place in Nepal. Presumably, Rakesh, taking off from what Amitabh Mattu said, when it happened in Bangladesh, we were caught unawares, and we've seen how these protests then turned into anti-India demonstrations. Is that something you fear that could happen in Nepal? In the past, politicians of that country have also whipped up anti-India sentiment when it suits them?
Rajdeep, that was my biggest concern, and I have been talking to people in Kathmandu, and so far, I'm very reassured that nobody, Oli has not had the best of relationship with the Modi government. We know that. And I thought that perhaps Oli, faced with these protests, might point to a foreign hand, and he has in the past pointed to the foreign hand being India. But this time, that has not been the case. So, in that sense, this is organic and this is homegrown. However, the ban on the social media apps is was perhaps the catalyst which lit the spark in what was already a sense of burning resentment among the youth. Amitabh spoke about the youth. The median age in Nepal is 25, which means that 50% of Nepal's population is below 25. Now, that's a very, very young population. And Amitabh is right when he says that there is a huge Nepali diaspora. So, if you look at Nepal's population, which is about 30 million, and if 50% is below 25, and Nepali diaspora is something like 5 million. And by the way, this does not include the Nepali who live in India, because those are not counted as diaspora.
Mhm.
So you are looking at a huge
But
chunk of the working population which is living outside Nepal because they can't find employment there, which is why 25% of Nepal GDP comes from its remittances. And now that you have that demographic bulge because of and so that is why you have this Gen Z. However, the Gen Z hasn't come about just on its own. See, when you ban social media and you have such a huge population of diaspora outside, you are also stopping communication with your father or your uncle or whoever it is who's living outside. So, because all these people speak on Facebook, they communicate on Facebook, WhatsApp, etc., etc. So you just blocked a huge communication channel for a huge section of the population to their resources, their emotional resources abroad. That is what lit the spark. And I think Oli, in his
but what
autocratic fashion, which he's been showing again and again in recent years, has just failed to see it. Sorry, yeah.
But the question comes, therefore, Amitabh Mattu. The question comes, Amitabh Mattu, given that, as I said, there seems to be now chronic instability, 9 changes of governments in the last decade. The constitution, which many thought would bring stability to Nepal, has clearly not done this. There is a tiny sliver of a class which has benefited hugely from government contracts, cronyism, but a vast majority of the people still live a very, very meager lives. Is there anything in your view that India can do at the moment? Or do we simply wait and watch to see what happens in Nepal next? Again, going back to the Bangladesh parallel, there we were seen to have put all our eggs in Sheikh Hasina's basket. Can India do anything differently in Nepal compared to Bangladesh?
I think Ambassador Sood has pointed out that there isn't still any sense that India is going to be blamed for the problems, which is very encouraging. And what you need to do to ensure that that discourse doesn't take shape is one, wait and watch, have the strategic patience not to be immediately reactive. Secondly, I think it's important to recognize that the democratic bulge, the young people of South Asia, are going to be its most important stakeholder. So you need to engage them, offer them scholarships. I know this might be come later, but ways of engaging the young people in a manner that we haven't done so far. We have engaged with the elites because we were familiar with the elites. There was a certain relationship between Indian political actors and the Nepalese elite. But that needs to change. You need to now invest in relations with these young people. Thirdly, in terms of governance, especially e governance, I think there are lessons that India has, best practices that can be adopted. Remember, this technology is a big genie. It's almost turning out to be a Frankenstein's monster. The ban on these social media applications was a result of a Supreme Court direction that all these applications, whether it's Meta or Alphabet, needed to set up an office in Nepal, have a grievance cell. On prima facie, not a bad idea, prima facie, completely reasonable. But none of them, neither Facebook or X or WhatsApp, has set up an office or a grievance redressal mechanism. But because there is this social media addiction, as well as the fact that you are dependent on the social media for new information, and now with WhatsApp and others and Facebook, and also for remittances, therefore, the ban caused this great implosion, which was waiting to happen. You require that catalyst. But I think India could potentially, in terms of cyber governance, in terms of digital governance, given that the India stack itself offers
Right.
a model for better governance, could offer lessons to Nepal. But most importantly, I think India needs to do it not in any way, in any patronizing fashion, but being seen as a partner of not just leaders, but of the people of Nepal, because that is your constituency of the future, the young people of Nepal, not the old,
Right.
cynical leaders of the past.
One final question, Rakesh Sood. What do you think happens next? Is there a real possibility of the army choosing to take over to stabilize Nepal? Do you see an interim government of the kind we saw in Bangladesh? Or do you see fresh polls being called instantly? A quick answer.
Rajdeep, the problem is that the Gen Z that is leading this revolt, as the popular media calls it, doesn't have a leader, and we don't know what they want. They are upset with the constitution. In fact, there were a whole number of constitutional amendments that were being talked about in social media. Now, if many of these are very, very significant constitutional amendments. So therefore, given the fact that the political leaders of all the major political parties are in disgrace. I mean, tomorrow, let's say if Sher Bahadur Dyoba was to become prime minister, within 24 hours, he would be out. Or Prachanda, or so we are looking at a complete rejection of some of these guys. So I do not know whether the constitutional framework that was built over a period of 7 years, in which came into being in 2015, is going to stick or not stick. That
Right.
constitutional framework created a federal republic of Nepal. Now, if there are going to be changes in the constitution, who's going to bring about those changes? I cannot. Will there be a new constituent assembly? Will there be a new parliament? Because they're asking for dissolution of parliament. So I think that right now we are in a state of complete uncertainty and anarchy as far as Nepal is concerned. Nobody really knows because
Right.
nobody is in charge. Now,
Which is
were the president at this stage to choose to say, all right, first order of the day is to restore law and order, then the only institution that can be called out is the army. And then comes the question as to who
and
then
that's
gets
what's
appointed.
happened. But we don't know
No,
whether
not yet, not yet.
we
I don't
sure,
think
but
the
we
army
don't
has
know
been
whether
called out
the
to restore
whether
law and
yeah,
order.
we don't know whether the army will actually take control.
No, the
Yes,
army
but
may
whether
not take
that will
control.
actually result in the army sort of taking over the country.
No, I don't
Right.
think the
It's one
army is
thing to
going to
take
take over
control
the
of law and
country.
order. It's another thing
You
to
can
take
then
control of the.
No, you can then ask a
Okay.
retired chief justice or somebody to form an interim government for a limited period, who can then engage in dialogue with civil society leaders, political party leaders, etc., with a view to creating a consensus on what is the way forward, whether we should have a new constitution, so we are in a very, very gray zone.
Let me leave it there, Rakesh Sood, because clearly we are seeing a very, very uncertain situation developing in a Himalayan republic, a country with which we share civilizational ties, borders, and a country where which we need to look at very, very carefully. Yet another country in our neighborhood is on the boil, and that does have important implications for India. Amitabh Mattu and Rakesh Sood for sharing your wisdom on the show this evening. Thank you very much.